March 17, 1949. 2047 a.m. The rope was cutting into Bumpy Johnson's wrists so deep he could feel it scraping against bone. His face was pressed against cold, wet asphalt. The rain from earlier that night had left puddles everywhere, and now his blood was mixing with the dirty water, turning it pink. His suit, the gray one he'd bought just last week from a tailor on 125th Street, was already torn to pieces. The same suit he'd worn to Sunday service, the same suit his wife had said made him look like a king. Behind him, a black Ford sedan sat with its engine running. 4 men from the Genovese family stood around him, laughing like they were at a comedy show. One of them, a fat man named Carmine Rossetti, held the other end of the rope. His hands were thick, covered in gold rings that glinted in the streetlight. "You think you can say no to us?" Carmine said, wrapping the rope around the car's back bumper with careful, practiced hands. "You think Harlem belongs to you? Let me show you what happens to people who forget their place." The car started moving. What happened next would have killed most men. For 2 miles, Bumpy Johnson was dragged down Lenox Avenue. His skin tore against the street. His ribs cracked against a curb. Blood painted a trail behind him that would take 3 days to wash away. Store owners would find pieces of his shirt in their doorways the next morning, but Bumpy Johnson didn't die. When they finally cut him loose, leaving him for dead in a dark alley behind St. Philip's Church, Bumpy opened his eyes. His body was broken. His face was so swollen, his own mother wouldn't have recognized him. But when a young boy found him the next morning and asked if he should call a doctor, Bumpy said 4 words that would echo through Harlem for the next 50 years. "No. Call my tailor." What nobody knew, what the history books won't tell you, is that 3 months later, those same 4 men would crawl down that same 2-mile stretch of Lenox Avenue, on broken knees, begging for mercy that would never come. And Bumpy Johnson would be standing at the end, watching every single inch of it. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to get crazy. And if you're already part of the family, drop a like, because what Bumpy did to these men, you've never heard anything like it. Trust me. To understand what happened on that cold March night, you need to understand what was happening in Harlem in 1949. You need to understand who wanted Bumpy Johnson dead, why they wanted him dead, and what they thought they could gain by breaking the most powerful black man in New York City. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about sending a message. This was about control. And Bumpy Johnson was about to send a message right back that the Italian mob would never forget. 1949, post-war Harlem. The soldiers had come home from fighting in Europe and the Pacific. The jazz clubs were packed every night with people trying to forget the horrors they'd seen overseas. Money was flowing through the streets like water, and everybody wanted a piece of that pie. Harlem in 1949 was a world unto itself. It had its own rules, its own economy, its own power structure. And at the very top of that structure sat one man, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. But everybody called him Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson had spent the last 15 years building something special. He wasn't just running numbers and protection rackets like the other guys. He was building a community. He was building loyalty. He was building something the Italian mob could never understand. When black families got evicted because they couldn't make rent, Bumpy paid it. No questions asked. No interest charged. Just a handshake and a promise to pay it forward when they could. When black businesses got robbed, Bumpy didn't just find out who did it, he made sure it never happened again. Word on the street was clear: you touch a business under Bumpy's protection, you disappear. When black children needed school supplies, boxes would show up at their doors with no return address. Nobody knew where they came from. Everybody knew where they came from. The people of Harlem didn't just respect Bumpy Johnson, they loved him, and that love was worth more than any amount of money. Because when you have an entire community watching your back, you become very, very hard to kill. But the Italian mob saw something different when they looked at Harlem. They saw millions of dollars flowing through Harlem every single week. They saw gambling operations, nightclubs, after-hours joints, and protection money that wasn't going into their pockets. They saw opportunity, and they saw one man standing between them and all that money. The Genovese family had been trying to move into Harlem for years. Vito Genovese himself, one of the 5 most powerful mob bosses in America, had made it his personal mission. He'd seen what Harlem could be worth if they controlled it. Tens of millions, maybe more. Genovese had set negotiators, men in nice suits with briefcases full of contracts. 50-50 partnership, they offered. We bring the muscle, you bring the connections. Everybody wins. Bumpy had said no. Genovese had sent lawyers, real lawyers from real firms downtown. They came with paperwork that would have made Bumpy a very rich man. Legal partnerships, legitimate business fronts, protection from the law. Bumpy had torn up the contracts in front of them and told them to leave. Genovese had even tried to set up a meeting, boss to boss, man to man. Let's talk this out, his people said. Mr. Genovese respects you. He just wants a conversation. Bumpy's response. He sent back a single playing card. The ace of spades. In the streets, everyone knew what that meant. Death before submission. I'd rather die than bow down to you. By early 1949, Genovese was done playing nice. His patience had run out. He called in a man named Carmine Rossetti, someone known throughout New York's underworld as the Butcher. Carmine had earned that name for a reason. He didn't just kill people, he destroyed them. He broke them down piece by piece, body and soul, until there was nothing left but a shell. He'd done it to union leaders who wouldn't cooperate. He'd done it to rival mobsters who got too ambitious. He'd done it to anyone who got in Genovese's way. Now Genovese was pointing him at Bumpy Johnson. I don't want him dead, Genovese told Carmine in a meeting at his mansion in New Jersey. The house was huge, with marble floors and paintings that cost more than most people's homes. Dead makes him a martyr. Dead makes him a legend. I want him broken. I want him crawling through those streets he thinks he owns. I want every person in Harlem to see what happens when you say no to us. Carmine smiled, showing teeth stained yellow from years of cigars. And after he's broken, he'll do whatever we tell him. He'll run Harlem for us. He'll be our puppet. And if he doesn't, Genovese shrugged. Then you can finish the job. What Genovese didn't understand, what the Italian mob never understood about Harlem, was this simple truth. Bumpy Johnson wasn't the man you could break. He'd grown up on these streets with nothing. He'd fought his way up from the very bottom. He'd buried friends, buried enemies, and buried his own fear a long time ago. The mob thought they were dealing with a businessman who'd gotten too big for his shoes. What they were actually dealing with was a war general, and they were about to start a war they couldn't win. Carmine Rossetti spent 2 weeks planning the attack. He knew he couldn't just walk up to Bumpy Johnson in broad daylight. Bumpy had too many eyes on him, too many people who would die before they let anyone lay a finger on him. Every time Bumpy walked down the street, people nodded to him. Shopkeepers came out to shake his hand. Children ran up to say hello. It wasn't fear that made them do this. It was genuine respect, genuine love. So Carmine had to find a weak spot, a crack in the armor, someone close to Bumpy who could be turned. He found a woman named Delilah. Delilah worked at one of Bumpy's clubs, a place called the Cottontail on 133rd Street. It was a classy joint, the kind of place where jazz musicians played until dawn and deals worth thousands were made over glasses of bourbon. Delilah was one of the hostesses, beautiful, with skin like dark honey and a smile that could light up a room. Smart, too. She spoke 3 languages and had 2 years of college before she'd had to drop out. But Delilah had a secret. Her brother, Marcus, owed gambling debts to the Genovese family. $15,000. Money he'd lost at a card game he never should have been playing. Money he could never pay back in 10 lifetimes. Carmine found her outside her apartment building on March 10th. It was a cold morning, and she was walking to work with her coat pulled tight against the wind. A black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. He didn't threaten her. He didn't have to. He just showed her a photograph. Her brother, Marcus, tied to a chair. Blood on his face, one eye swollen shut, two fingers on his left hand bent at angles that fingers shouldn't bend. "Your brother has 3 days," Carmine said, his voice soft and almost kind. "Unless you help us." "Help you do what?" Delilah asked, her voice shaking so hard she could barely get the words out. "Nothing big, nothing that'll get you in trouble. Just tell me when Bumpy leaves the club, what time, which door he uses, if he's alone or with people. That's all. You give me that information, your brother walks free, and you never see my face again." Delilah didn't want to do it. She respected Bumpy more than she'd ever respected any man. He'd given her a job when no one else would hire her. He treated her with dignity when most men in his position would have treated her like property. He'd even helped pay for her mother's funeral last year. But Marcus was all she had left. Her baby brother. The boy she'd raised after their parents died. The only family she had in this world. On March 17th at 9:15 p.m., she made a phone call from the payphone outside the club. "He's leaving through the back door at 2:30. He'll be alone. His driver's sick tonight." Carmine had 3 of his best men waiting in the alley behind the club. Giuseppe, Joey Eyes, Moretti, a man who'd killed 11 people and never lost a minute of sleep over any of them. Vincent the Hammer Calabrese, who got his name from his favorite tool for solving problems, and Tommy Bones, a kid from Brooklyn who was trying to make a name for himself in the organization. At 2:34 a.m., Bumpy Johnson walked out the back door of the Cottontail, lighting a cigarette. He didn't even have time to take a drag. Joey hit him from behind with a lead pipe. The sound it made against Bumpy's skull was like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Vincent grabbed his arms before he could fall. Tommy kicked his legs out from under him. And then Carmine stepped out of the shadows, holding a length of rope and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Johnson," he said, kneeling down so Bumpy could see his face through the blood running into his eyes. "My boss sends his regards. He wants you to know that this didn't have to happen. You could have taken the deal. You could have been partners with the most powerful family in New York. But you had to be proud. You had to be stubborn." Carmine wrapped the rope around Bumpy's wrists, pulling it tight enough to cut off circulation. "So, now I'm going to show you what your pride costs." They threw Bumpy in front of the car, tied the rope to the back bumper. And for the next 2 miles, they dragged the King of Harlem down Lenox Avenue like he was nothing but garbage. The whole time, Bumpy didn't scream, not once. He gritted his teeth so hard 3 of them cracked. He bit through his own lip, but he never, not even for a second, gave them the satisfaction of hearing him beg. When they finally cut him loose behind St. Philip's Church, Carmine stood over his broken body and spat on him. "Tell your people," Carmine said. "Harlem belongs to Genovese now." Then they got back in their car and drove away, leaving Bumpy Johnson to die alone in the cold dark. But here's what Carmine Rossetti didn't know. Here's what the history books never mention. Here's the part of this story that changes everything. Bumpy Johnson had known the attack was coming. Not the exact details. Not the exact night. But he'd sensed something was wrong for about a week. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't survive in this game by being blind. He survived by paying attention. By reading people. By understanding that in this world, everyone has something to hide. 3 days before the attack, one of Bumpy's people, a barber named Harold who cut hair for half the wise guys in Manhattan, had heard something interesting. 2 of Carmine's men had been in his shop, talking when they thought nobody was listening. Something about teaching the king a lesson and breaking him in public. Harold had called Bumpy that same night. Bumpy had listened without saying a word. Then he'd hung up the phone and sat in his office for 2 hours thinking. He also knew something was wrong with Delilah, not because she told him, but because when a woman who's always calm suddenly starts looking over her shoulder every 5 seconds, when she jumps at every loud noise, when she can't look you in the eye, you notice. Especially if you've been watching people your whole life like Bumpy Johnson had. So why did he walk out that back door alone? Why did he let them take him? Because Bumpy Johnson understood something that Genovese and Carmine and all the rest of them would never understand. Sometimes you have to let your enemy think they've won. You have to let them show their true face. You have to let them get comfortable. You have to give them enough rope to hang themselves. While Bumpy was being dragged down Lenox Avenue, he wasn't just surviving. He was watching. Through the pain, through the blood in his eyes, he was memorizing everything. He saw every face. He heard every voice. He memorized the license plate of the car. He noted the brand of cigarettes Carmine was smoking. He counted every turn they made. He clocked the exact route they took, every corner, every street sign. Because Bumpy knew something that Carmine didn't. They thought breaking his body would break his power. But his power was never in his body. It was in his mind. It was in his connections. It was in the love that an entire community had for him. The next morning, when that young boy found him behind the church and asked if he should call a doctor, Bumpy said, "No, call my tailor." The boy was confused. "Your tailor? But mister, you're bleeding everywhere. You need a hospital." Bumpy smiled through his broken teeth. It was a terrible sight, but somehow still reassuring. "Because when I stand up again, I need to look like a king. Kings don't wear rags. And I'm going to stand up, son. Believe that." Within 24 hours, word had spread through every corner of Harlem. What the Italians had done, how they'd dragged Bumpy through the streets, how he'd survived, how he hadn't screamed once, not even a single time. People were furious. They wanted blood. Groups of young men were ready to march down to Little Italy that very night and burn it to the ground. They wanted revenge, and they wanted it now. But Bumpy, speaking from his hospital bed through wired soot jaws, told them to wait. "When you kill a snake," he said, each word causing him pain, "you don't just cut off its tail. You cut off its head. And you make sure everyone sees it happen." For the next 3 months, Bumpy healed, and while his body was recovering, his mind was working. He found out everything there was to know about Carmine Rossetti and his 3 men, where they lived, where they ate breakfast, what time they went to sleep, who they loved, who they feared, who they owed money to. He mapped out their entire lives like a general mapping out a battlefield. He also found out about Delilah's situation. Instead of having her killed, which most men in his position would have done without a second thought, he sent someone to pay off her brother's debt. Every single penny. When she came to him, crying and begging for forgiveness, he told her simply, "You did what you did for family. I understand that better than you know. But now you're going to help me do what I have to do for mine." 3 months. 90 days. That's how long Bumpy waited. Long enough for Carmine to think he'd gotten away with it. Long enough for the Genovese family to start making moves in Harlem, thinking the coast was clear. Long enough for everyone to let their guard completely down. And then, on June 17, 1949, exactly 3 months after they'd left him for dead, Bumpy Johnson made his move. June 17, 1949, 11:00 p.m. Carmine Rossetti was playing cards at his usual spot, a social club on Mulberry Street in the heart of Little Italy. The place was called Romano's, and it was supposed to be the safest spot in Manhattan for made men. Armed guards at the door. Lookouts on the street. A back exit that led to a tunnel. Joey Eyes, Vincent, the Hammer, and Tommy Bones were with him, just like they always were. They'd been celebrating for weeks now. Harlem operations were starting to flow. Money was coming in. Genovese was happy. They'd done the impossible. They'd broken Bumpy Johnson, and Harlem was falling into their laps. None of them noticed when the lights went out. None of them heard the doors being locked from the outside. None of them saw the guards being quietly removed from their posts. By the time the emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a dim red glow, there were 15 men standing in a circle around them. Black men. Harlem men. Men with rage in their eyes and 3 months of anger in their hearts. Each one was holding a weapon. Bats, chains, hammers, lead pipes. And standing in the center of that circle, wearing a brand new gray suit and a hat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, was Bumpy Johnson. His face was different now. The scars from the dragging were still visible, white lines across his dark skin like a roadmap of pain. But his eyes were the same, calm, patient, absolutely certain of what was about to happen. Carmine reached for his gun. It wasn't there. Someone had taken it off him without him even noticing. He looked around wildly. His men were in the same situation, disarmed, surrounded, helpless. Looking for this, Bumpy held up the pistol, then tossed it on the floor. The metal clattered against the wood. You won't need it. Carmine's face went white as a sheet. Johnson, listen. What happened in March? That was business. Nothing personal. It was just business. Genovese ordered it. I was just following orders. Bumpy interrupted, his voice soft and somehow more terrifying than any shout. That's funny, because I remember you spitting on me. I remember you laughing. I remember the smile on your face while I was bleeding on that street. I remember you telling me that Harlem belongs to Genovese. Bumpy walked closer. Each step was slow, deliberate. Every footfall echoed in the silent room. When he was close enough to smell the fear on Carmine's breath, the sweat pouring down his face, he stopped. You dragged me for 2 miles, Bumpy said quietly. You tore the skin off my back. You broke 6 of my ribs. You left me to die in a dark alley like I was garbage, like I was nothing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a playing card. The ace of spades. He held it up so Carmine could see it clearly. Do you know what this means? Carmine was shaking now, his whole body trembling. Please, I have a family. I have kids, 2 daughters. Please, I'll do anything. I'll give you money. I'll leave New York. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Anything, please. Bumpy leaned in close. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than any scream. Roads have memories. Those 3 words hit Carmine like a sledgehammer to the chest, because he suddenly understood exactly what was about to happen. Bumpy's men broke their kneecaps first, all 4 of them. Baseball bats to the knees. The sound of bones breaking was like branches snapping in a storm. The screaming lasted for 10 minutes. Joey Eyes, who had killed 11 men without flinching, was crying like a baby. Vincent the Hammer, who got his name from breaking other people's bones, was begging God for mercy. Tommy Bones passed out twice from the pain. When it was done, none of them could stand. None of them could walk. All they could do was crawl. And then Bumpy's men loaded them into a truck and drove them to Lenox Avenue. It was midnight by the time they arrived at the starting point. The streets were empty, but the windows weren't. Word had spread. People knew something important was happening. They watched from their apartments, from stoops, from rooftops. Children were woken up by their parents to see, and they all saw the same thing. 4 Italian mobsters dropped onto the street, forced to crawl down Lenox Avenue on broken knees. The same 2-mile stretch where they dragged Bumpy Johnson 3 months before. Every inch of it, every crack in the pavement, every piece of broken glass, every rough stone. Bumpy walked behind them the entire way, slow, patient. When one of them stopped, too exhausted or in too much pain to continue, Bumpy would stand over them and say 6 words. I didn't stop. Neither will you. It took them 4 hours to crawl those 2 miles. 4 hours of agony. By the end, their knees were ground down to raw bone. Their hands were shredded into hamburger meat. Carmine was crying, begging for death. But death wasn't part of Bumpy's plan. At the end of those 2 miles, right in front of St. Philip's Church, where they'd left Bumpy to die, a crowd had gathered. 300 people. Maybe more. All of Harlem had come out to witness. Bumpy stood in front of the 4 broken men. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every person there could hear him perfectly. Go back to your boss. Tell him what happened tonight. Tell him that Harlem remembers. Tell him that Harlem never forgets. And tell him if he ever sends anyone into my neighborhood again. Bumpy dropped the ace of spades on Carmine's back. They won't crawl out. They'll be carried out in boxes. Word spread through New York's underworld like a fire through dry grass. By noon the next day, every mobster from Boston to Philadelphia had heard the story in complete detail. The butcher of the Genovese family, the man who broke people for a living, had crawled 2 miles on broken knees to Harlem while 300 people watched and cheered. Vito Genovese called an emergency meeting that same afternoon. His lieutenants gathered in his mansion, expecting him to order a war. They expected retaliation. They expected blood to run in the streets of Harlem. Instead, Genovese sat in silence for 10 full minutes, just staring at the wall. Then he said something none of them expected to hear. We don't touch Harlem. Not now. Not ever. That man, he's not a businessman. He's not a gangster like us. He's something else entirely. And whatever he is, it's not worth the cost of finding out. Carmine Rossetti never recovered. His knees were destroyed beyond any hope of repair. He spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, a broken man who flinched every time someone mentioned the word Harlem. He died 7 years later, alone, in a nursing home in New Jersey. The nurses said he had nightmares about that 2-mile crawl until the very day he stopped breathing. Joey Eyes, Vincent, the Hammer, and Tommy Bones all left New York within the week. Different cities, different names, different lives, but they all carried the same scars, the same limp, the same story that they'd never ever tell their children. As for Delilah, Bumpy kept her on at the club. He never mentioned what she'd done. Not once, not even in private. When people asked him why he showed her mercy when he'd shown Carmine none, Bumpy would just shrug and say, "She chose her brother over me." That's not betrayal. That's love. And I don't punish people for love. The story of that night became legend in Harlem. Parents told it to their children. Children grew up and told it to their children. It became more than just a story about revenge. It became a lesson about what happens when you underestimate someone, when you mistake their kindness for weakness, when you think you can break a man who was built by the streets themselves. Bumpy Johnson lived another 19 years after that night. He saw Harlem change in ways he never could have imagined. He saw the civil rights movement rise up. He saw his neighborhood fight for justice in ways that didn't involve broken knees and midnight crawls. But what he proved that night in 1949 never changed, and it never will. Power isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. It's about patience. It's about memory. It's about making absolutely sure your enemies understand that there's no corner of this earth where they're safe from the consequences of what they've done. Carmine Rossetti thought he could break Bumpy Johnson by dragging him through the streets. Instead, he created a legend that would outlive them both by 100 years. Roads have memories. 3 words. That's all Bumpy said. But those 3 words carried more weight than any speech, any threat, any show of force ever could. Because when you make a road remember what you did to a man, you better be ready for that same road to remember you right back. END. Look, if this story hit different, do me a favor. Smash that like button. It only takes 1 second, and it helps more than you know. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you even waiting for? We're dropping Bumpy Johnson stories every single week, and I promise you, each one is crazier than the last. Drop a comment and let me know. What would you have done? Would you have shown mercy to the men who tried to destroy you? Or would you have finished the job right there on that street? I want to hear your thoughts. Next time, we're telling the story of when Bumpy Johnson walked into Sing Sing prison alone and walked out with the most dangerous alliance in New York history. Trust me, you absolutely do not want to miss that one. Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't given, it was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned every single inch of his.